She was just
This
a
cannot
waitress.
continue as it
At
is.
least that's
I
what he thought
understand
when
your
he
point.
humiliated
We
her
need to
in front
address
of a
it now.
room full of millionaires. He called her stupid, uneducated, worthless. He had no idea she held 2 university degrees. He had no idea she spoke 5 languages. And he definitely had no idea that she knew every single one of his dirty secrets. What happened next? She destroyed his entire empire in less than 5 minutes using nothing but her voice and the truth he thought was buried forever. This billionaire went from untouchable to unemployable. And it all started with a single drop of water. Stay with me because what you're about to hear will make you believe that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who can bring your whole world crashing down. This is the story of the night I stopped being invisible. Welcome to Storysphere. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. There's something about being invisible that feels safe. When nobody sees you, nobody can hurt you. When nobody notices you, nobody asks questions. And for a long time, that's exactly what I wanted. To be nobody, to be nothing. To just exist without being seen. My name is Sarah Chun, and I'm about to tell you a story that changed everything for me. A story about the night I stopped hiding and finally found my voice. I worked at a place called the Golden Terrace. If you've never heard of it, don't worry. It's not the kind of restaurant regular people go to. This was the kind of place where a single meal could cost what most families spend on groceries for a month. Where the wine list had bottles that cost more than a used car. Where reservation lists were booked solid for half a year. I was a waitress there, just another face in a black dress, moving quietly between tables, refilling glasses, clearing plates, smiling politely, and disappearing into the background. That was my job, to serve without being remembered, to be present without being noticed. I was 26 years old, but I felt ancient. Life has a way of aging you when you've been through things you'd rather forget. My black uniform was always perfectly pressed. My hair pulled back tight in a bun, my face carefully neutral. I never smiled too much. I never spoke unless someone asked me a direct question. I never, ever drew attention to myself. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about working in places like this. The wealthy don't really see you. You're like furniture to them. Useful when needed, forgettable the moment you walk away. And honestly, I was grateful for it. I needed to be invisible. I needed to be forgotten. But I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I had dreams, big dreams. I finished university with 2 degrees, one in law and another in nursing. People used to ask me why I chose such different fields, and I'd tell them the truth. I wanted to help people in every way possible. I wanted to understand how to fight for justice and how to heal wounds. I wanted to make a difference. Life had other plans. Things happened, bad things, the kind of things that make you question everything you thought you knew about the world. And one day, I just walked away from my career, from my ambitions, from everything. I took a job at the Golden Terrace because it was the perfect place to hide. Nobody asks a waitress about her past. Nobody cares where you came from or what you used to be. For 8 months, I moved through that restaurant like a ghost. I learned the rhythm of the place. I learned which guests liked their water with lemon, which ones wanted to be left alone, which ones treated staff like human beings, and which ones didn't. I learned to read a room in seconds, to sense tension before it erupted, to disappear before anyone could drag me into their drama. And it worked. For 8 months, I was nobody. I was safe. I was invisible until the night Victor Cain walked through those doors. I remember the moment I first saw him. The entire atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. Our manager had warned us earlier that someone important was coming. Someone who demanded perfection. Someone who didn't tolerate mistakes. He said it with this look in his eyes, this mixture of fear and desperation that told me whoever this person was, they had power. Real power. Victor Cain was exactly what you'd picture when you think of a billionaire. Tall, broad-shouldered with silver hair slicked back perfectly. He wore a suit that probably cost more than I earned in 6 months. His watch caught the light from the crystal chandeliers, gleaming like it wanted everyone to notice. He walked into the Golden Terrace like he owned it. And maybe in some way he did. Money has a way of making you feel like you own everything. He wasn't alone. He had 3 people with him. 2 men in expensive suits and a woman wearing jewelry that could probably pay off someone's mortgage. They were laughing at something Cain had said. That forced kind of laughter that happens when people want to impress someone powerful. Our manager personally escorted them to the best table in the house, right in the center of the dining room under the main chandelier. The table that said, "Look at me. I'm important." Cain sat down without even acknowledging our manager. He was too busy talking, gesturing with his hands, dominating the conversation before it even really began. I watched from across the room, keeping my distance. Something about him made my stomach tighten. Maybe it was the way he spoke to our manager, like he was an inconvenience. Maybe it was the way his guests seemed nervous, eager to please. Maybe it was just instinct. But every part of me screamed, "Stay away from that table." I served the quiet couples in the corners, the business partners who spoke in hushed tones, the elderly couple celebrating an anniversary. I did my job. I stayed invisible. I was good at it. But then James, one of the senior waiters, rushed up to me near the kitchen. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, "I need you to cover Cain's table for me, just for a few minutes." I spilled wine on my shirt. "I need to change." My heart dropped. "James, I can't." "Please," he begged. "It's just water refills. You'll be fine. Just don't talk to him. Don't even look at him. In and out. That's it." Before I could say no, he was gone, disappearing toward the staff room. I stood there frozen, staring at that table in the center of the room, at Victor Cain, laughing loudly, completely unaware that his night was about to change, and so was mine. Have you ever felt your heart pounding so hard you could hear it in your ears? That's what I felt as I picked up the crystal water pitcher and started walking toward Victor Cain's table. Every step felt heavy. Every breath felt shallow. My hands were steady, though. Years of practice had taught me that much. You can be terrified on the inside and still look perfectly calm on the outside. Cain was in the middle of telling a story. Something about a real estate deal he just closed, something about outsmarting his competition. His voice was loud, confident, the kind of voice that expected everyone to listen. His guests were hanging on every word, nodding, laughing at the right moments. I approached from the side, moving quietly. This was my specialty, being there without being noticed. I reached for the first water glass, the one in front of the woman with the expensive jewelry. My hand was steady. My movements were practiced, smooth. I poured without making a sound. Then I moved to the second glass, Cain's glass, and that's when everything went wrong. He shifted in his seat suddenly, leaning back to emphasize something in his story. His elbow shot out and knocked directly into my arm. The water pitcher tilted. Just a few drops, maybe 3 or 4, splashed onto the sleeve of his jacket. Time seemed to stop. Cain froze mid-sentence. His eyes dropped to his sleeve. Then slowly, very slowly, he turned his head and looked up at me. The expression on his face made my blood run cold. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something worse. It was disgust. The entire table went silent. His guests stared. The woman's eyes went wide. Even the tables nearby seemed to quiet down, sensing something was about to happen. "Are you kidding me right now?" Cain's voice was low. Dangerous. "I'm so sorry, sir," I said quickly, my throat tight. "It was an accident. Let me get a... Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" His voice rose, cutting through the restaurant like a knife. I kept my eyes down, my training kicking in. "Stay calm. Apologize. Don't make it worse." "I sincerely apologize, sir. I'll get something to clean it immediately." "A cleaning cloth?" Cain laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was cruel, mocking. "You think that's going to fix this? This is a custom-tailored suit. $15,000, and you just dumped water on it because you can't even hold a pitcher steady." My face burned with humiliation. I could feel every eye in the restaurant on me. The other guests were watching. The staff was watching. Our manager was rushing over, his face panicked. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stood there frozen as Cain looked me up and down like I was dirt on his shoe. "Look at you," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You probably dropped out of school, didn't you? Couldn't cut it in the real world. So now you're here carrying plates and spilling drinks on people who actually matter. Something twisted in my chest. A familiar pain. The pain of being made to feel worthless. The pain of being treated like you don't matter. Like you're nothing. But Cain wasn't finished. He was enjoying this. You know what the problem is with people like you? He continued, gesturing at me like I was an object. You don't understand your place. There are people in this world who build things, who create value, who make billions and change industries. And then there are people like you, the ones who serve us, the ones who are completely replaceable. One of his guests shifted uncomfortably. The woman looked away, but Cain didn't care. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. I could have you fired with a snap of my fingers. He said, one word to the owner and you're done. You'll be out begging for another minimum wage job that you'll probably lose because you can't even do something as simple as pour water. The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing exactly where it was meant to hurt. For 8 months I had stayed quiet. For 8 months I had swallowed my pride, my intelligence, my voice. I had made myself small because it felt safer. But in that moment, something inside me cracked. All the anger I'd been holding in, all the frustration, all the times I'd been treated like I was worthless, all the times I'd stayed silent when I should have spoken up. It all came rushing to the surface at once. I lifted my head. For the first time in 8 months, I looked someone directly in the eyes without fear. And what Victor Cain saw in my face made him pause. It wasn't submission. It wasn't shame. It was something else entirely. It was rage. I set the water pitcher down on the table slowly, deliberately. Then I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I spoke. You asked if I dropped out of school, I said, my voice clear and steady. I didn't. I finished university. 2 degrees, actually. 1 in law, 1 in nursing. Cain blinked. His mouth opened slightly. I speak 5 languages fluently, I continued. English, Mandarin, French, Spanish, and German, which, judging by the way you've been mispronouncing words all evening, is about 4 more than you can manage. The guests at the table stared at me in shock. The woman's hand flew to her mouth. One of the men leaned forward, suddenly very interested, and Victor Cain's face began to turn red. I wasn't done, not even close, because I was about to tell him something that would destroy everything he'd built. You know what's funny about powerful people? They think their secrets are safe. They think that because they have money, because they have influence, because they have lawyers, nobody will ever dare to expose them. They think they're untouchable. Victor Cain was about to learn he was wrong. I took a step closer to the table. My heart was racing, but my voice stayed calm, steady, strong. Mr. Cain, I said, looking directly at him, since you've decided to humiliate me in front of everyone here, let me return the favor. Let me tell your new friends here exactly who they're about to do business with. Cain's face went pale. Excuse me? I turned to the 2 men at the table. They were sitting up straighter now, their expensive suits suddenly looking uncomfortable. These were investors. New investors. People Cain needed to impress. People he needed to trust him. Gentlemen, I said, my voice professional now, like I was back in a courtroom. Before you sign anything with Mr. Cain, you should know something. This real estate empire he's been bragging about. It's built on lies, blackmail, and ruined lives. That's enough, Cain shouted, starting to stand. Sit down, I said, my voice sharp, and to my surprise he did. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the authority in my voice. But he sat. I turned back to the investors. 6 months ago, I worked for a law firm that represented one of Mr. Cain's former business partners, a man named Robert Chin. Cain convinced Chin to invest $12 million into a property development project, promised him returns of 40%, showed him falsified documents, fake contracts, manufactured projections. The investors were leaning forward now, listening to every word. When Chin discovered the fraud and threatened to go to the authorities, Cain had his lawyers threaten Chin's family. They dug up a medical issue Chin's daughter had, threatened to leak it to the press, threatened to ruin Chin's reputation. Chin was forced to walk away, losing everything. His marriage fell apart. His daughter had to drop out of college. Last I heard, he was working 2 jobs just to survive. Cain's face was bright red now. These are lies. She's making this up. Am I? I turned to him, my voice cold. Chin versus Cain Enterprises. Case number 2847B. Settled out of court 8 months ago. Non-disclosure agreement signed, which is why nobody knows about it. One of the investors pulled out his phone, already typing. But Chin wasn't the only one. Was he, Mr. Cain? I continued. There was Patricia Rodriguez, a single mother who invested her life savings into your Miami project. When that project collapsed, you blamed her for inadequate due diligence. You kept every penny while she lost her home. How do you? Cain started. How do I know? I interrupted. Because I reviewed that case too. Rodriguez versus Cain Properties. Another settlement. Another silenced victim. Another family destroyed while you walked away richer. The woman at the table was staring at Cain now. Her face a mixture of disgust and shock. I switched to Mandarin, addressing one of the investors directly. My voice was respectful but firm. Sir, the Shanghai project he's pitching to you, the one with the guaranteed 25% returns, those numbers are inflated by 40%. The actual projected returns are barely 12%. And that's if everything goes perfectly, which it won't, because he's planning to cut construction quality to increase his own profit margins. The investor's face went rigid. He understood every word. I switched to German, addressing the other investor. And the Berlin development he mentioned, the one he said was approved by the city council. It's not. It stalled in committee because of zoning violations. He's been lying to you for 3 months, hoping to get your money before you discover the truth. The second investor's jaw clenched. I turned back to Cain, switching to English. You see, Mr. Cain, you made a mistake. You assumed that someone in a waitress uniform couldn't possibly know anything, couldn't possibly be educated, couldn't possibly be smart enough to see through your schemes. Cain's hands were shaking now, not from anger, from fear. But before I worked here, I continued, I was a lawyer specializing in corporate fraud. And before that, I was a nurse, which means I know how to investigate criminals, and I know how to identify people who are sick with greed. I pulled my phone from my apron pocket. I also know that 3 of your former investors filed complaints with the Securities Commission last month. Complaints that are currently under investigation, and I know that the documents they submitted included evidence of wire fraud, falsified tax returns, and illegal offshore accounts. Cain lunged forward. You can't prove any of that. I don't have to, I said calmly, because they already have. The investigation is active. The subpoenas are being prepared. And within 6 months, everything you've built through lies and intimidation is going to come crashing down. The entire restaurant was silent now. Every guest, every waiter, every person in that room was frozen, watching this confrontation unfold. I leaned in close to Cain, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he and his table could hear. You called me replaceable. You called me uneducated. You treated me like I was nothing. But the truth is, I know exactly who you are. I know what you've done, and now so do they. I straightened up and looked at the investors. Gentlemen, if you'd like the names of the lawyers handling the investigation, I'd be happy to provide them. I'm sure they'd love to hear about these new projects he's pitching to you. Both investors stood up simultaneously, their faces dark. One of them was already on his phone. The other was grabbing his briefcase. We're done here, one of them said to Cain, his voice icy. And just like that, Victor Cain's empire began to crumble, right in front of him, because of a waitress he thought was nobody. The silence that followed was deafening. Victor Cain sat at that table frozen, his face white as paper. The investors were gathering their things, moving quickly, urgently. The woman with the expensive jewelry was staring at Cain like she'd never seen him before, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Our manager stood a few feet away, his mouth open in shock. The other guests in the restaurant were whispering, their phones out, probably already texting friends about what they just witnessed. And I just stood there, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. What had I just done? For 8 months, I'd been so careful, so quiet, so invisible. And in less than 10 minutes, I'd destroyed that carefully built wall. I'd exposed myself. I'd revealed who I really was. But more importantly, I'd exposed him. You. Cain's voice was shaking. You have no idea what you've just done. I know exactly what I've done. I've told the truth. That's something you wouldn't recognize. One of the investors paused before leaving. He was the older man, the one I'd spoken to in German. He turned to Cain, his face hard. My lawyers will be contacting you tomorrow. Consider our deal terminated and expect a full audit of everything you've presented to us. The second investor didn't even bother to speak. He just shook his head in disgust and walked out. The woman at the table stood up slowly, carefully placing her napkin on her plate. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes. Respect maybe, or perhaps recognition, like she understood what it took to stand up to someone like Cain. Thank you, she said quietly to me. Then she turned to Cain. I came here tonight thinking I was meeting a successful businessman. Instead, I met a fraud. Don't ever contact me again. She walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Cain was alone now at that big table in the center of the room. The table that was supposed to make him look important. Now it just made him look small, isolated, exposed. He stood up slowly, his hands clenched into fists. You're finished, he said to me, his voice low and venomous. I will destroy you. I will make sure you never work anywhere again. I will. You'll do nothing, a voice interrupted. We both turned. Our manager was stepping forward, and to my shock, he didn't look angry. He looked proud. Mr. Cain, the manager said firmly, I think it's time you left. Cain stared at him in disbelief. Do you know who I am? Do you know how much money I spend here? I know exactly who you are, the manager replied. And after what I just heard, I know that your money isn't worth having. We don't serve criminals at the Golden Terrace. Please leave. Cain's face turned purple with rage. For a moment I thought he might actually explode. But then he grabbed his jacket, shot me one last look of pure hatred, and stormed toward the exit. Just before he reached the door, he turned back. This isn't over, he spat. Yes, it is, I said calmly. Because by tomorrow morning, every major news outlet is going to hear about what happened here tonight, and they're going to start asking questions. Good luck trying to silence all of them. Cain's face went pale again. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The moment he was gone, the entire restaurant seemed to exhale. Conversation started up again. The tension that had gripped the room slowly released, but everyone was still looking at me, whispering, wondering. The manager approached me, his expression unreadable. My office, he said quietly. Please. My stomach sank. This was it. I was fired. Of course I was fired. I just caused the biggest scene this restaurant had probably ever seen. I'd humiliated a billionaire customer. I'd revealed secrets that were supposed to stay buried. I followed the manager through the narrow hallway to his small office. He closed the door behind us and turned to face me. I prepared myself for the worst. But instead of yelling, he smiled. 20 years, he said, shaking his head. 20 years I've been in this business, and I have never seen anything like what you just did. I blinked, confused. I understand if you need to fire me. Fire you? He laughed. Sarah, you just saved 3 people from being scammed out of millions of dollars. You exposed a criminal. You stood up to someone who's been terrorizing people for years. Why on earth would I fire you? Because I made a scene. Because you did what was right. He interrupted gently. Listen, I've known about Victor Cain for a long time. I've heard the rumors. I've seen the way he treats people. But people like him, they're protected by their money. Nobody wants to stand up to them because they're scared. And then you, a young woman he tried to humiliate. You brought him to his knees using nothing but truth and intelligence. He sat down behind his desk, gesturing for me to sit as well. Sarah, you have 2 university degrees. You speak 5 languages. You clearly have a brilliant mind. What are you doing working as a waitress? I looked down at my hands. I was hiding. From what? From myself? I admitted quietly. From expectations. From people who wanted me to be something I wasn't sure I could be anymore. I made some mistakes in my previous career. I trusted the wrong people. I got hurt and I needed to disappear for a while. The manager nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. And now, I looked up at him. Now I think I'm done hiding. Good, he said with a smile. Because something tells me the world needs people like you. I walked out of the manager's office feeling like I was floating or maybe drowning. I honestly couldn't tell the difference. My hands were still shaking. My heart was still racing. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching my life happen to someone else. The dinner service was winding down now. Guests were finishing their meals, paying their bills, getting ready to leave. But I could feel their eyes on me. Whispers followed me as I walked through the dining room. Some were curious. Some were amazed. Some were probably judging me. I didn't care anymore. James, the waiter who'd asked me to cover Cain's table, rushed up to me near the kitchen. His face was a mixture of shock and awe. Sarah, what just happened out there? Everyone's talking about it. They're saying you destroyed Victor Cain. I just told the truth, I said simply. But how did you know all that stuff about the fraud? The investigations, I used to be a lawyer, I explained. Corporate fraud was my specialty. Cain's name came across my desk multiple times. I recognized him the moment he walked in. James stared at me like he'd never seen me before. You're a lawyer. Why are you working here? Because sometimes you need to step back from the world to figure out who you really are, I said. And sometimes it takes something like tonight to remind you. I went to the staff room and changed out of my uniform. As I was packing my bag, my phone buzzed. Multiple notifications, news alerts, social media messages. Apparently, someone at the restaurant had recorded part of the confrontation. It was already spreading online. Hashtag Waitress Billionaire was trending. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello, Miss Chun. The voice was professional, female. My name is Diana Park. I'm a criminal attorney with the Securities Commission. I understand you have information regarding Victor Cain's business practices. My heart skipped. How did you get my number? One of Cain's former investors called us. He was at the restaurant tonight. He heard what you said and he wants to cooperate with our investigation. But he says you have specific information that could help us build a case. I sat down slowly. I do. I reviewed 2 cases involving Cain when I worked at Morrison & Associates. There were settlement agreements, but I remember the details. Would you be willing to testify? I thought about all the people Cain had hurt, all the families he'd destroyed, all the lives he'd ruined while growing richer and more powerful. I thought about Robert Chin and his daughter, about Patricia Rodriguez losing her home, about all the victims who'd been silenced by money and fear. Yes, I said firmly. I'll testify. I'll tell you everything I know. Thank you, Diana said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. People like Cain get away with things because people are too afraid to speak up. What you did tonight took courage. After we hung up, I sat there for a long moment, processing everything. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time it was a text message. Miss Chun, this is Richard Morrison from the German Investment Group. I was at the restaurant tonight. I want to thank you for your honesty. If you're interested in returning to legal work, my company is looking for someone with your skills and integrity. We need lawyers who aren't afraid to stand up for what's right. Then another message. This one from a news outlet asking for an interview. Then another from a law firm I'd heard of, one of the biggest in the city. Then another and another. Within an hour, I had 7 job offers. 7. I sat there staring at my phone, overwhelmed. 8 months ago, I'd walked away from my career thinking I wasn't good enough, thinking I'd failed, thinking I didn't belong in that world anymore. I'd made myself invisible because I was scared. Scared of failing again. Scared of being hurt again. Scared of not being enough. But tonight, I'd done something I never thought I could do. I'd stood up to one of the most powerful men in the city. I'd exposed his crimes. I'd protected people from being hurt. And I'd done it using nothing but my voice, my knowledge, and my courage. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I did belong in that world after all. Maybe running away wasn't protecting me. Maybe it was just holding me back. I walked out of the Golden Terrace for the last time that night. The air was cool, refreshing. The city lights sparkled around me. And for the first time in 8 months, I felt like I could breathe. As I walked down the street, my phone rang one more time. It was the manager. "Sarah, I forgot to tell you something. That woman who was at Cain's table, she left you this." "Left me what?" "A tip. $20,000. She said it was for your courage." I stopped walking, tears suddenly filling my eyes. Not sad tears, not scared tears, just overwhelmed tears. The kind that come when you realize that sometimes doing the right thing does matter. Sometimes standing up does make a difference. Sometimes your voice is more powerful than you ever imagined. You know what I learned that night? Silence feels safe, but it's a prison. And the moment you find your voice, the moment you stand up and speak your truth, everything changes. Not just for you, but for everyone around you. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was Sarah Chun. I was a lawyer and a nurse. I spoke 5 languages. I had 2 degrees. I had knowledge and courage and a voice that mattered. And I was done being silent. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. And when they finally speak, the world shifts in ways nobody expects. If the story moved you, remember your voice matters. Your truth matters. You matter. Don't let anyone make you forget that. Thank you for watching StorySphere. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below.